Welcome to Full Disclosure. This will be a DebtBook series where we spotlight the strategies, stories, and people that are shaping public finance. My name is Stephen Yoakum. I'm excited today to be joined by my friend and favorite colleague. We'll keep that a secret, James.
Hey, Stephen. Happy to be here today. Welcome, everyone. I know people are streaming in through the chat, so really appreciate you being us live today. We will also post this as a recording and a podcast as well. But want to get right into the good part. We are joined today by Michael Gaughan. He is the executive director of the Vermont Bond Bank. For those avid full disclosure customers, you have heard him on a previous podcast, but we brought him back, which is very exciting. So to give a brief intro of Michael, he began his career in community planning. He also had stops at PNC Bank as well as the National Development Council. Michael does a lot more outside of his day job as the executive director of the Vermont Bond Bank, though. He is also the executive director of the Vermont Educational and Health Building Financing Agency. That's a mouthful, but I think I nailed it. And he is also an active member of GFOA. Michael, I could keep going with your accolades, but thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited to be on here and get to talk about my favorite subject, which is the Vermont Bond Bank.
No, we very much appreciate it, and we're excited to dive in. So Stephen and I dug into LinkedIn, the records, all of the ways to research you. And I think what I wanted to start with was probably where you honed your leadership skills, which was the president of your college ski team. I would love to know, do you feel like that's where you became the leader that you are today?
Yeah, that was I have some regrets about college and feel like I could have done a better job across many different avenues, including my classwork. But one area I'm really proud is I was the president of the Telemark Ski Club. And so while it sounds like just a ski club, it was actually a club that was devoted to providing gear for telemark skiing, which is, for those of you that are alpine skiers, when your heel is released. And, at that time, 20 years ago, it was a little bit more important for backcountry skiing to have telemark skis. It's the equipment's caught up. But, we had a budget. We purchased, I think, like about 7 pairs of new skis per year, and would spend a lot of time tuning those, waxing those, and providing free gear along with their tuition, but free gear to folks at the college. So that was a lot of fun, and learned some things from that.
That's awesome. You've been a public servant of Vermont for longer than we know, which is amazing. All right, to dig into today, can you just tell us a little bit about your role at the bond bank and what you do there day to day?
Yeah, so I'm the executive director of the bond bank. We have a staff that numbers in the whopping amount of 4. And but we're really efficient and we do a lot of good work. But our total portfolio, we're a public instrumentality of the state, and we make loans to units of government all around the state for everything, for any type of project, public project, be it school construction, renovation, road repairs, in some instances, fire truck purchases, any sort of long-lived capital asset we're helping to finance. And that includes, a program we're going to talk about that we use DebtBook a lot with, our pooled loan program, which is about $720 million in loans, but also we're the administrator of the state's SRF program, so Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Program. Our program is not leveraged. There's no debt that those loans in the SRF program secure, but it is a decent amount of loans that we have outstanding. That's about at any one time around 260 million today, and then layer on to that some newer programs to do with, you all are in North Carolina. Whereas there's obviously been some really catastrophic flooding. We've had our own experiences with that in 2023 and 2024. And so we have a fairly significant post-disaster lending program and some energy efficiency lending programs, and some emergent programs as well that we'll talk about later in our discussion. But if you sort of wrap all those together, our portfolio is around $1 billion of loans, and so that's a big number. But it also includes every municipality that has debt and school district that has debt in the state. There's one entity, the city of Burlington, that has a public rating and goes to market by themselves quite often. But we do see them through the SRF program occasionally, and also their electric revenue bonds as well. We interact with in our program. So yeah, fairly large share of the overall Vermont municipal debt market.
Yeah, so really quickly, we have a lot of customers that are, cities or counties that issue their own debt. Could you talk a little bit about kind of the origination of the Vermont Bond Bank, like what was the purpose of the kind of the start there, and really what did success look like in those early days?
Yeah, so it's a great story. I wasn't around for the beginnings, which occurred in 1970, but it is a really good public finance story, as far as I understand. This is not fact checked. It's sort of an oral history of the bond bank from the father of a local bond council that we used to work with. He's the one that brought it to help establish it in Vermont, and then the story of its origins were passed down to me. But the story goes that unlike now, currently we're the third oldest state in the country, behind Maine and New Hampshire. And but in the 60s, like many places, we had a large amount of school-age children that population was growing. And alongside that came the need for additional schools. And a lot of schools were built in the 60s. And the different banking landscape at that time, different environment as it relates to maybe a little bit different environment as it relates to expectations of interest rates. And so what happened was the schools were financed on with short-term notes, with bond anticipation notes. And there's some vestigial parts in statute where those bans can be rolled over for up to 10 years because the banks were not willing to provide the long-term financing for those school districts. And so we had a little bit of a capital crunch. At the same time, in New Jersey, Hawkins, Delafield, and Goldman Sachs were pitching the state on a version of the local improvement authority structure that exists in some of the counties in New Jersey, and to pool loans together and issue those on a kind of a statewide basis. State of New Jersey did not sort of bite on the idea, but somebody knew somebody, and the idea traveled up to Vermont, and the Vermont Bond Bank was born as a result. So our authorizing legislation was in 1969, 1970, and we did our first transaction in 1970 that was exclusively for school districts. And on an inflation adjusted basis, it was our largest bond issuance ever. In today's dollars, it would have been about $280 million. And so our next largest issue is actually the one we just completed, which was even with a refunding about 140 million. So quite significant. And that was really interesting. The innovation in our structure, we have it was at that time, I don't believe, new to have a state moral obligation backing some sort of state instrumentality. But what was, I think, innovative and novel was the state intercept mechanism that is a key part of our credit enhancement. So if a borrower in our portfolio doesn't pay us, we can then ask the treasurer under statute to redirect payments to us to backfill debt service that is due. That's never been used. And there's over 30 states that have that mechanism for school districts. But what is unique in our instance is that it's both for municipalities and school district and all units of governments that we have that authority. And, fast forward 5 years from our creation in 1970, a similar structure, a state intercept, was used in the the restructuring of New York City debt in 1975 with the Municipal Assistance Corporation, MAC. And now there's 14 or so active bond banks around the country that share a similar structure. It it looks very similar in New Hampshire and Maine and even Alaska, and then subsequently the structure's been modified as it's made its way across the country. And what we're going to talk about during this conversation is how we sort of became a bond bank 2.0.
Right. Yeah. So before we transition into that, some of our customers that are here now with us are going to listen to the recording may not have known a lot about a bond bank or known about it a bit. They just heard a great recap of that. In terms of then how you became a DebtBook customer, can you dig into why you were looking for a solution? You don't have to dig into exactly why you landed on DebtBook. We would love that, but more, you landed on a solution being an institution that isn't, a issuer exactly as we think about it in the DebtBook platform today. So we'd love to just hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so two things really there. As I mentioned, we have added a lot of programs over recent memory. But going back 8 years when I started at the bond bank, we have a great financing team in terms of the underwriters, the broker dealers that we work with, as well as our financial advisor OmniCap, who does just an excellent job with helping us. But we were pretty dependent upon those entities for all of our backup data. And from a resiliency standpoint, we needed to be more independent, stand our own 2 feet. So, as a former public finance banker, one of the first things I did was to, build out our debt in our own in spreadsheets, and that works pretty well. But understanding that I may not be here tomorrow for whatever reasons, God forbid, we needed resiliency that would maintain the bond bank's integrity over decades to come. And so the DebtBook platform is pretty easy to understand, is something that is organized in a way that makes sense, is very similar to how sort of the conventional debt profile is organized from any banker on the street, and was consistent with what we do. And we're a small shop. We're only 4 people. So, getting the story straight on, what bonds we've refunded, what bonds we haven't, having the ability to go back in time when we're trying to sort of track through what the debt profile has looked like over the years, as we, sort of backfill different financial reports from the state, who may be on a different reporting basis than we are. That all those sort of dynamic features of the platform are really helpful for us. So you've got resiliency, data integrity, and just ease of use, I'd say, are all an important part of the story.
Yeah. So you brought up a little bit about the origination of the bond bank and kind of getting these schools access to capital. And then you brought up this general resolution and kind of becoming bond bank 2.0. Can you introduce that a little bit? What is the need to change from what I would call 1.0 to your new 2.0 structure?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is not uncommon, right? Like a lot of different issuers out there are trying to make modifications to their resolution from time to time. Ours, as I sort of alluded to, but just to fully flesh that out, our, Bond Bank 1.0 was that you pool loans together from various communities for various projects. Those serve as collateral for bonds that you issue. Those bonds are then credit enhanced by the state through 2 means. One, a moral obligation from the state, which is effectuated through a debt service reserve fund. So if that debt service reserve fund ever gets pulled upon, there's a mechanism in statute where we can ask the governor and then the state legislature to backfill the debt service reserve fund. Never been used, carries a pretty good rating because of that implicit guarantee. Then you have the state intercept, which from a ratings perspective is actually more helpful for us. And so that mechanism was helpful for a long time. There was really, it worked well. But back in 2020, February 2020, right before some other things happened in the world, I got called in to start having some conversations about school construction in Vermont. And no surprise to us, given our largest bond deal was our first in 1970. 50 years later, all those schools that we financed were reaching the end of their useful life. And so we started to have a really serious conversation about school construction in the state. And, despite the fact that schools are really large capital assets, quite expensive, they are only, maybe like 30% of our overall portfolio. And so there's clearly, we knew from the numbers that there was clearly a backlog of need. And also during the Great Recession, the state had reduced its its state aid for construction to try and save money. So all those factors had sort of conspired to give us we're in a bit of a hole as it relates to new school construction and renovation. At the same time, there are a lot of efforts with school consolidation to try and reduce costs, and many other policy discussions around education. Then we hit the Great Reset, or excuse me, then we hit the pandemic in March 2020, and a lot of those conversations kind of got put on pause, but we didn't stop thinking about it because we knew, that our capital need for schools is somewhere in the billions, and our total debt outstanding, well, our total loan portfolio right now is 720 million. So it's easy to think that we could triple, even make maybe quadruple the size of our portfolio once we really start getting into the school renovation need that we have in the state. Well, all else equal, what would have happened is that the state's moral obligation to the bond bank would have increased accordingly. And so while it is not necessarily a significant challenge in our current rating profile, it could be over time. And so we started to think, well, hey, how can we know this big policy question is out there on school construction, but how can we finance our deals more efficiently, while at the same time reducing our exposure to or our need for use of the moral obligation? And by the way, by reducing that debt service reserve fund, at least a few years ago, the situation has changed now with reinvestment rates being higher, but reduce some of the drag on our overall structure. So we went out and did some research like others have done that are investigating efficient pooled loan structures. Had some great conversations with our friends in Virginia at Virginia Resource Authority, who had gone through a similar process a number of years prior, and realized we'd like to move to a structure that was a senior lien that was then over collateralized by cash flows on loans from the junior lien, and then the junior lien would be not necessarily over collateralized, but would continue to benefit from the moral obligation, thus reducing our use of the moral obligation significantly. So great idea, very exciting. But the challenge was our 1988 resolution required a 2/3 majority of bondholders for the change to occur. So we really needed to be patient with the whole process. And so I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit, but we got things in place, and then each time we paid off principal, that ratio changed because basically the new those bonds were retired. They were no longer subject to the new potential provisions. And then each time we sold new bonds, you had deemed consent from bondholders. And so we had this process of, maturing bonds and then issuing new bonds and, watching that ratio sort of tick up. And so that's where DebtBook was useful in that process.
I love how you spoke about connecting with Virginia on that. And today we have customers on the call who are hoping to learn from you. Just aside on that, are you still in conversations with them? So, right, like you were able to kind of make the decision that it's kind of a ship that turns over time, right? As you explained, are you still in contact with them just on like, hey, here's kind of where we're at in the process. Any advice here as you've continued to roll that out?
Yeah, it's pretty fun. We don't state bond banks are kind of like best kept secrets in many states. They do the work of a dark night in terms of lowering the cost of capital for everyone and sort of leveling the playing field for any municipality or school district. And so we have a kind of an ad hoc group of about 14 bond banks including one aspiring bond bank, and also we've recently added some pooled loan municipal pooled loan issuers in there to talk about best practices and things we're all experiencing, because we have a lot of commonalities with how we receive funds, how we manage trustee, things of this nature. And yeah, continue the dialogue with Virginia Resource Authority. They just have a really great program that we've been able to learn a lot from there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I have a new goal to get into the bond bank group chat at some point. That sounds like
It's
sounds like a great place to be. Yeah.
It's secret handshake, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Michael, you talked a little bit about using DebtBook to kind of track, how much of the outstanding principal has been kind of signed on to this new resolution. You talked a little bit about senior versus junior as well. I'm interested, what kind of projects would be used going forward for, a senior versus a junior in this new structure?
Yeah, and let me just I'll get there, but I just want to say that, part of this is having a dynamic debt profile where we can sort of tag, hey, everything that was issued after the summer of 2022 is in the has deemed consent. And then, like, watching as those older bonds mature, which with with your platform is pretty easy to do, has been really helpful for us to just keep track of where we are over time in terms of that consent. And so, we are, and this was disclosed in our last offering document, we did a process where in our last bond issue, we asked for voluntary consent. We were getting really close. And so we just went out and we gave some order priority in the bond issuance process for folks that had given us consent, which was a nice incentive and was successful. So we still have to validate all that. But we do think we are about at the point where we'll be able to flip the switch on the resolution, and we'll go from having one lien within the resolution to now having three. So we'll have the legacy bonds, which are the ones issued prior to next year, and those will start at the top of the waterfall. Then we'll have the senior bonds and then the junior bonds, and it won't be so much that each loan is funded out of one of those liens. It's that the capitalization will occur out of both liens, and it will just go into a pot by which the loans are funded. And same deal with the loan repayments; they go into a pot which sort of waterfall over the senior and junior lien to pay back debt holders. So the rate that ultimately the borrowers receive will be reflective of a blended rate on whatever our cost was between the senior and the junior issuances in that series, or in that issue rather.
No, that's very interesting. Would love to hear, we've talked now about like the structure, but you in your position must see a number of projects propping up around the state. Would love to hear about any that are kind of currently maybe coming across your desk that are of interest, or something you've worked on in the past 12 months, just kind of an eye into like projects that come across your desk.
Yeah, I think one of the more exciting categories of projects are twofold. One is traditionally exciting, and one is surprisingly exciting, I guess I'll say. So the first one is we recently financed a library renovation in Middlebury, Vermont. A place I went to college, near and dear to my heart. And it's in addition to a historic building that will really increase the capacity, provide some learning opportunities for kids, and really just be a great addition to a small downtown that does well, but needs some additional activity and some foot traffic. So that's a really exciting one. We've done a couple of those, and have a couple more, well, one more coming up. The cost of everything, libraries, schools, everything, over the last 3 years has increased dramatically. Our on the one hand, folks had to sort of delay projects as construction costs, they couldn't get their arms around them. And so just for example, in 2023, we were $40 million in new money issuance. Keep in mind, there's only 640,000 people in Vermont. But then this year, we are going to be somewhere around 140 million. And so part of that's explained by the deferred projects, but a lot of that is also just the cost of construction. And so unfortunately, things like the libraries in the schools are very expensive, but they are great projects and really exciting, and you can visually see them very well. And then you have other things that are like really surprising and really innovative in a surprising way. So one of the great things we can do is that we make it really easy for towns to sort of co-fund projects together. And so we had an example from 3 years ago where two communities bought a gravel pit together. And it's, at first we were sort of like, okay, you want to buy a gravel pit? That's interesting. But what they're really doing is vertically integrating their highway departments with the raw material that they need. And so that was really easily done because we could create joint and separate accounts for them to go in and fund this project. And then fast forward a few years later, when we had our devastating flooding, and the majority of the damage around the state during that flooding process was to municipal roads. And so they had a ready source of raw material to rebuild quickly. And so the towns that had access to gravel pits, there were 3 across the state, of which I'm aware of. There might be more. Were able to really rebuild at a lower cost and more quickly. And so it's just, I think that's a really interesting example of, we provide sort of a platform by which folks can access low-cost capital efficiently, and then they figure out how to prioritize in their community. And that's a great example, I think, of really surprising resilience. Like, you could not design a federal program to help a small community buy a gravel pit, but it was extremely effective in their resilience. So I really like those 2 examples.
Yeah, it must be exciting to you to, work on these projects and see all the development happen around you as well, like knowing you were kind of integral to that process, or at least your team of 4 helped along the way.
Yeah, it is. And I used to be better at playing the game of asking people where they're from and then naming a project in their town. Our loan officer gets to have more of the fun conversations these days. But that is, yeah, very, very fulfilling, obviously.
Yeah, the ability to go out across the state and see projects, that were spreadsheets on or an issue in DebtBook, but then see it in real life must be just like a very special way for your work to come to life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great. Well, that's all the questions we had today, Michael. Thank you very much for joining us. For those that listened in live, thank you for joining as well. Make sure to be on the lookout for any additional information regarding the next session. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Well, first episode, Stephen, in the books.
Yeah, it was great to hear from Michael, how he's using the technology around him, DebtBook specifically, to help him in his current work.
Yeah, we've talked to so many customers during our time at DebtBook, unpacking the features they need to enhance our application, to get to know them more, customer empathy, to have a conversation strictly focused on Michael, his problems, what he's doing every day, how he's solving them. I really enjoyed that, and I'm really excited for more.
Yeah, and just like we talked about with him seeing kind of the community around him evolve as he works on all these different financing deals. It's kind of same with us. We get to kind of develop this product and see how other individuals use it. It's great to see that kind of come to life and hear about how they use our product.
It was. So huge thanks to Michael for joining us and being the first participant on Full Disclosure Live. More to come, and we're excited to have you as a part of it.
Yeah, we'll see you next time on Full Disclosure Live.